I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. Looking back, it's almost comical how oblivious I was to the cracks forming in my marriage. For 12 years, I thought I had it all: a beautiful wife, 2 amazing kids, a good home, and a career that afforded us the stability most people dream about. Lisa and I had built this life together, and, to everyone else, we seemed like the perfect couple. We were the ones people would come to for advice at dinner parties, our kids got along with theirs, and our house was always filled with laughter and friends. I thought we were happy, even lucky. But then there was the Thursday night that changed everything. It was around midnight, and I was up late, working in my office at home. The house was silent, the kids long asleep, and Lisa had told me earlier that she'd be back late because of a last-minute work project. She worked in marketing and had one of those ambiguous roles where last-minute demands were common, so I didn't think much of it. At least, not until I saw her phone light up across the room. It was one of those late-model phones with a huge display, and it cast a bright, stark glow in the dark. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just a harmless notification, maybe a social media ping or a reminder. But then it buzzed again, more insistently. Curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't the kind of husband who snooped. I'd never had a reason to, and honestly, I was proud of the trust Lisa and I shared. But something felt off. It was like a small, nagging voice in my mind, whispering that this wasn't just a typical message. I glanced at the screen and saw the preview: "Can't wait to see you this weekend." My chest tightened. The contact name read, Mike, work. I knew her colleagues, or at least most of them, and there had never been any mention of a Mike. But even without a name, the message itself didn't leave much room for interpretation. I put the phone back down and sat there, stunned, replaying every memory I had of the last few months. Had I missed something? Had I ignored the signs? Lisa had always been charismatic, always had admirers, but she'd promised me that I was the only one who mattered. I felt a chill settle over me as I began to realize just how little I might actually know about my own wife. I couldn't believe what I was thinking. It was absurd, wasn't it? We had 12 years, 2 kids, and a whole life together. But once the thought was there, I couldn't shake it. I needed to know more. The next day, I started piecing together the clues, slowly and carefully. I didn't want to raise suspicion, so I acted as if nothing had changed. Lisa was back to her usual self, breezing around the kitchen as she made breakfast for the kids, laughing at some story on the morning news. I forced myself to smile, to joke with her the way I always did. Every time she glanced at me, it was like she was daring me to catch her, to see through the act. But I'd always been good at poker, and I kept my face blank. While she was busy with her morning routine, I checked her laptop, scanning through her emails and messages. I found nothing at first, and for a moment, I almost let myself breathe a sigh of relief. But then I saw a folder tucked away, labeled simply, Travel. Inside were tickets, itineraries, and hotel confirmations from what seemed like dozens of trips. Most of them matched up with her usual work schedule, dates I recognized. But there were a few that didn't align with the timelines she'd given me. She'd gone on more work trips than she'd ever let on. With each detail, my confidence crumbled, giving way to something I hadn't felt in years: doubt. I started second-guessing everything: the late nights, the sudden work emergencies, the unexplained charges on her credit card that I'd brushed off. The woman I thought I knew was beginning to look like a stranger, and with each discovery, I felt more foolish. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I wasn't done yet. I needed more. The next weekend, she was scheduled for another work trip. She'd mentioned it casually over dinner, saying that her company had landed a new client, and she'd have to travel to meet them for some presentations. I forced a smile, pretending to be the supportive husband. Inside, my stomach twisted with anger, with betrayal, with the urge to confront her right then and there. But I held back, reminding myself that if I acted too soon, she'd have an excuse, a story, a way to worm out of the truth. So I waited. On the night before her trip, I did something I'd never done before. I checked our shared credit card account. I scrolled through the recent charges, my heart pounding as I saw one entry in particular, a restaurant I knew well, a place she'd never taken me. The charge was from a few nights prior, on a day when she'd told me she was working late. I could picture her there, laughing with someone who wasn't me, sharing a bottle of wine, weaving the web of lies she thought I'd never see through. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning, wondering how far I'd let this go on. I knew I'd have to confront her eventually, but I wasn't ready. I needed more proof, something undeniable, something she couldn't spin or talk her way out of. But how far was I willing to go? And at what cost? The next morning, Lisa left as planned, her suitcase packed neatly, a warm smile on her face as she kissed me goodbye. I played along, forcing myself to kiss her back, to tell her to have a safe trip. As she walked out the door, a part of me wanted to scream, to tell her I knew everything. But I held back, my jaw clenched, my fists tight. When she was gone, I took her laptop again, this time looking through her emails with a laser focus. There was a trail there, small pieces of evidence scattered like breadcrumbs, each one confirming what I already knew but wished I didn't. Her messages with Mike were all there, hidden in an obscure email folder with a name she probably thought I'd never think to check. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. The final blow came when I saw their plans for the weekend, the dinner reservations, the hotel confirmation, the details laid out in a way that couldn't be misinterpreted. She'd lied, over and over, every detail a thread in the tapestry of deception she'd spun for herself. And as I sat there, looking at the evidence in front of me, the last remnants of my hope shattered. This wasn't just a fling or a lapse in judgment. This was planned, calculated, deliberate. I took a deep breath, leaning back in my chair, letting the anger simmer and boil. The man she thought she'd fooled, the man she'd lied to for months, was gone. After that Thursday night, everything changed for me. I was still James, the husband, the father, the friend, but now I was also a stranger in my own life, silently stalking through my marriage, piecing together clues in a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Each new day brought a fresh layer of doubt and unease, and I became a detective in my own home, watching and waiting. I kept up the act, keeping things smooth and easy at home, careful not to let Lisa suspect that I knew anything. But I couldn't keep myself from sneaking glances at her, wondering how I'd missed the signs. She went about her routine like everything was normal, blissfully unaware of my anger simmering beneath the surface. Part of me wanted to confront her, to drag out every lie and watch her try to explain it away. But a stronger part of me knew I wasn't ready. I needed concrete proof. If this was the end of our marriage, I needed it to be clear, clean, and undeniable. Lisa's next business trip came sooner than I expected, just a week after I'd found her messages with Mike. She didn't give me the usual rundown about where she'd be and what meetings she had lined up. I didn't ask, though I could sense her growing comfort in hiding the truth from me. She was becoming bold in her deceptions, maybe even careless. I told myself that would work in my favor. The morning she was supposed to leave, I woke up early, my mind already racing. As Lisa packed her bag, she hummed softly to herself, an infuriatingly cheerful sound. It was the same bag she always took, a small, smartly packed suitcase, enough for a few days' stay. She even asked me to zip it up for her, flashing me that familiar smile, the one I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Thanks, hon," she said, leaning in to give me a peck on the cheek. I fought the urge to pull away. I didn't want her to sense anything different in me, not until I was ready. "Anything for you," I replied, swallowing down the bitterness in my throat. She didn't seem to notice. As she finished getting ready, I noticed something small and out of place, a small pendant around her neck, one I hadn't seen before. It was subtle, something I could have easily overlooked on any other day, but now, it felt like a breadcrumb leading straight to the truth. I wanted to ask about it, but I stopped myself, filing the detail away instead. When she left, I went back inside, shutting the door slowly and leaning against it. The anger that had been simmering in me surged, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let emotions get the better of me now. I needed a clear mind for what I had to do next. I didn't have to wait long for my chance to confirm her betrayal. I'd seen her booking confirmation on her laptop, and I knew exactly where she was staying. That afternoon, as I wrapped up work early, I felt a sick excitement twist in my stomach as I planned my next move. I didn't want to just know about the affair, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. If she was willing to treat our marriage like a joke, then she'd left me no choice but to find a way to protect myself. On the way to the hotel, my thoughts were tangled. A dozen scenarios flashed through my mind, each one worse than the last. What if they were in the middle of some intimate dinner? What if I caught them together in public, acting like a happy couple? Or, worse, what if I ran into people who knew us? The idea of seeing her in the arms of another man, of her looking at him the way she used to look at me, made me feel physically sick. But I pushed through it. If this was the cost of truth, then so be it. The hotel was tucked away in a part of town we rarely visited, a sleek, modern building with a subtle air of exclusivity. As I pulled into the lot, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I walked through the lobby, nodding at the receptionist, who barely glanced at me. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times on the drive over. The plan was simple: get a clear look at the two of them together, and then leave before I lost control. I had a vague sense of her room number from the email confirmation, so I took the elevator to the top floor, feeling the cold, sterile hum of the space around me. My footsteps echoed down the hall as I approached her door, each step heavy with anticipation and dread. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Part of me wished I'd turn the corner and see her sitting alone, innocently working. But I wasn't naive anymore. The door was ajar, just slightly. I could hear laughter from inside, muffled and intimate. My heart pounded as I looked inside, careful to stay hidden. The sight that met my eyes was exactly what I feared. There she was, sitting at a table with him, wine glasses in front of them, laughing at something he'd said. She was leaning forward, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, her hand reaching out to touch his. It was a simple, tender moment, but it hit me like a slap to the face. That was my wife. That was supposed to be my life. I didn't wait to see more. I backed away, feeling the sting of betrayal tighten around my chest. As I reached the elevator, I felt an odd sense of clarity. This was the proof I needed, the final piece of the puzzle. She couldn't lie her way out of this. I had seen it with my own eyes. Driving home, I played it over and over in my mind, the way she'd looked at him, the laughter, the touch. It wasn't just a fling, it was something deeper, something that had been building behind my back for who knows how long. The realization was like a punch to the gut. Everything I thought I knew, everything we'd built, had been tainted by her deception. That night, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the pictures I'd taken on my phone, proof of her lies. I felt anger boiling up again, but it was laced with something colder, a resolve I hadn't felt before. I knew now that this wasn't about confronting her and demanding answers. I didn't need explanations or justifications. What I needed was a way out, a way to make sure I came out of this hole. As the hours ticked by, my mind raced with possibilities. If she wanted to betray me, she would get what was coming to her. I would make sure of it. But I wasn't going to act out of rage or lose my cool. No, I was going to be methodical. Precise. This wouldn't just be a breakup, it would be a reckoning. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. The following days passed in a blur. Knowing the truth about Lisa's betrayal somehow made it easier to act as if nothing was wrong. Each smile, every casual touch, and even the quick kisses she'd give me in passing felt hollow, like the final notes of a song that had already ended. Yet I kept up the charade, playing the part of the loving husband, all the while laying the groundwork for what I'd come to see as my exit strategy. It was strange, but once I'd made up my mind, I felt lighter. I wasn't burdened by confusion or doubt anymore. Now, I had a mission, a purpose, to ensure that when I walked away, I would do so without any strings attached, leaving Lisa to deal with the fallout of her actions. And I was going to make sure she didn't walk away unscathed. I knew that confronting her wouldn't give me the satisfaction I craved, and it wouldn't solve anything. I wanted more than just an argument and a hasty apology. I wanted her to feel the consequences of what she'd done. So I started with small moves, putting together a strategy that would ensure I'd be ready when the time came to expose her secrets. One evening, as Lisa and I were watching TV, I mentioned an idea that I'd been toying with for days. I brought it up casually, almost as if it had just come to me. "Hey, honey, you know how we've been talking about renovating the basement?" I began, glancing over at her. She nodded, her eyes still on the screen, unaware of what I was setting up. "Well, I think we should think about refinancing the house." She looked over at me, curious but not suspicious. "Really? Now?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, leaning forward to make it sound more convincing. "Rates are low, and it could give us a little extra to do some upgrades. Plus, if we want to build an addition, this would be the perfect time. We could even add that office you've always wanted." She smiled, the idea obviously appealing to her, and nodded. "You know, that's actually a good idea. I've been wanting more space for ages. Maybe we could look into it this weekend." "Definitely," I replied, already thinking about how I'd adjust my plan based on this new agreement. Refinancing would mean pulling together financial records, and I'd need to see everything: the accounts, the investments, the debts. It would be the perfect way to discreetly document every asset we shared and prepare for the inevitable division. I made a mental note to get copies of everything while Lisa thought we were just prepping for renovations. Over the next week, I threw myself into researching the refinancing process, consulting with lenders, and assembling all our financial documentation. Lisa, ever the partner in our supposed future, joined me enthusiastically. I hated how easily she could compartmentalize, planning our lives together in one moment and sneaking away with Mike in the next. But I held my tongue, determined not to tip her off. After our renovation planning meeting with the lender, I had everything I needed: a complete record of our joint finances, accounts, and the division of assets, right down to the penny. Lisa had no idea that, while she was dreaming about her new office space, I was preparing to leave her with as little as possible. Then, one evening, I planted the final piece of my plan. We were hosting a small get-together with some friends, nothing too big, just a few people over for drinks and appetizers. Lisa loved hosting, she was in her element, flitting around the kitchen, laughing and making jokes with our guests. Watching her that night, I felt a strange mix of anger and detachment, as though I were watching a stranger play a part I'd once loved. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself and quietly slipped into her office. I knew she had files in there, her private records. I'd always respected her space, but tonight I didn't care. My hands were surprisingly steady as I pulled out her laptop, typing in the password I'd guessed ages ago. She'd used it for years, something basic, and I felt a grim satisfaction when it worked. In seconds, I was in. I clicked through the folders quickly, looking for anything that would further cement my suspicions. Emails, messages, files, anything that might prove useful if things got ugly. I was about to shut it down when a new message pinged in, catching my attention. It was from Mike. "Looking forward to this weekend," it read, along with a heart emoji. I read it twice, feeling a fresh wave of anger, and copied the message, saving a screenshot to my phone before logging out and slipping back into the party. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside her, my mind raced with thoughts of revenge. Now I had the proof. I could go to an attorney with the screenshots, the financial documents, and the list of work trips that didn't add up. I could start the process quietly, without her even knowing. I had everything I needed to make my exit clean. The next morning, I reached out to an attorney discreetly. I made an appointment for the following week and shared the documents I'd gathered. My lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Linda, was impressed. She'd handled cases like mine before, but even she admitted that the level of detail in my plan would make things almost seamless. With this evidence, you'll be able to make a clean break, she assured me, scanning through the records. And if you want sole custody of the kids, I think we can make that happen. Courts don't take kindly to spouses who lie. Hearing those words felt like a victory, even if it was bittersweet. I thought about my kids, about how this would change everything for them. But I also knew they deserved better than a family built on lies. They deserved a father who wouldn't be taken advantage of, who could teach them what it meant to value loyalty. Over the next few days, I continued my act, pretending to be the doting husband while I moved forward with the legal proceedings. Lisa was so wrapped up in her affair and her plans for her new office that she didn't notice a thing. To her, I was still clueless, the dependable husband she could rely on to keep her life stable while she did whatever she pleased. The next Friday night, Lisa had another work event, and I knew it was time to put my plan into its final stage. I'd arranged for someone to photograph her with Mike, catching them in a compromising position that couldn't be denied. This would be my trump card, the piece of evidence that would leave her no way out. I felt no shame in it, after all, she'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. When she returned that night, she was quiet, almost nervous. I knew she felt the tension, but she brushed it off, acting like nothing was wrong. I let her, knowing that soon, she'd be forced to face the truth she'd been running from. On Monday morning, Linda called. She'd received the final pieces of evidence I'd gathered over the weekend and was preparing to file the paperwork. My hands shook slightly as I ended the call, realizing that this was it. There would be no going back. Soon, Lisa would be served, and her world would crumble the way mine had just weeks before. As I sat in my office, looking out the window at the life I'd built, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also shown me who I was, what I valued, and what I was willing to fight for. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. And in that moment, I knew I was ready. The day Lisa was served the divorce papers was a day I thought would bring closure. I imagined the look of shock on her face, the dawning realization of her betrayal laid bare. The plan had gone off without a hitch. Linda had coordinated everything, arranging for a private investigator to serve the papers while I was at work. That way, there'd be no confrontation, no chance for her to manipulate or twist the story. By the time I returned home that evening, the house was silent. Lisa's car was parked in the driveway, but as I stepped inside, I found her sitting in the kitchen, the divorce papers open on the table, her face pale and tear-streaked. For a moment, I was taken aback by how small she looked. The woman who'd stood so confidently at our parties, who'd managed to live a double life without ever raising suspicion, was now broken in front of me. But I steeled myself. I couldn't afford to feel sympathy for her. I reminded myself of the late nights, the betrayal, and the way she'd laughed with him. I sat across from her, the cold surface of the table an ocean between us. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough," I replied, my voice hard. "I saw the messages, Lisa. I saw everything. And I had someone get pictures of you with him. So don't bother denying it." Her face fell, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. After a few moments, she managed, "I didn't think you'd find out like this." "That's the problem, isn't it?" I shot back, feeling my anger rise. "You thought you'd get away with it. You thought I'd never see through you." She looked down, her fingers trembling. "I never meant for it to go this far. I know that's no excuse, but I was lonely, James. I was so alone, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected, stirring a flicker of doubt I hadn't prepared for. I had built up this image of her as the cold-hearted villain in our marriage, someone who'd chosen to betray me simply because she could. But her face, filled with guilt and sadness, made me wonder if maybe I'd missed something too. But I shoved the thought away, unwilling to be dragged into her justifications. This isn't just about us, I said, glancing toward the hallway where our kids' rooms were. This is about our family, our children, the life we built. I thought it meant something to you. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she let out a shaky breath. It did mean something, James. It still does. But I don't know when things changed. Somewhere along the line, we became strangers. I felt like you weren't there anymore, like you didn't see me. She laughed bitterly, wiping her tears. Ironic, isn't it? I felt invisible, and now I'm exposed. Her words stirred something deep in me, a recognition I didn't want to face. I wanted to believe it was all her fault, that she was the one who had broken us. But as she spoke, I couldn't ignore the pang of truth in her voice. Had I really been there for her? Or had I been so wrapped up in my own routines that I'd overlooked the distance growing between us? We sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. I finally broke the silence, my voice softer than I intended. It's over, Lisa. There's no fixing this. She nodded, her head bowed. I know. I know that now. As I stood to leave, she looked up, her eyes red and filled with something I hadn't seen in years, fear. What about the kids, James? How do we tell them? That was the question that had kept me awake at night since I'd started this plan. I wanted to protect them from the fallout, to shield them from the brokenness of their parents' marriage. But there was no easy way to explain to a child why their family was falling apart. We'll tell them together, I said. When the time is right. She nodded, a silent agreement. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it, that we'd quietly go our separate ways. But life rarely unfolds as cleanly as we plan. A week later, the universe took matters into its own hands. I was at work when I got the call. It was from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as it delivered the news. There's been an accident, Mr. Preston. It's your wife. Lisa. My heart stopped, and the world blurred around me. I barely heard the rest of what they were saying. All I could process were the words, car accident, and, critical condition. I dropped everything and drove to the hospital in a daze, my mind reeling with 1,000 fears, memories, and regrets. I hadn't wanted this. I wanted her to pay, to face the consequences, but I hadn't wanted her to suffer like this. When I arrived at the hospital, a doctor met me in the waiting room. He wore a grave expression, and the look in his eyes told me everything before he even spoke. She's in a coma, he said quietly. We've done everything we can, but she may not wake up. I'm so sorry. I sat down, my hands shaking. In all the scenarios I'd imagined, I never saw this coming. Lisa, the woman I'd loved and then come to hate, was now lying in a hospital bed, caught between life and death. And here I was, left to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage and a broken family. I was allowed to see her, just for a few minutes. Walking into that room, I barely recognized her. Tubes and machines surrounded her, her face pale and still. I stood by her side, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to find some way to make sense of everything that had happened. But all I felt was an overwhelming sadness. I leaned close, my voice barely a whisper. Lisa, I wanted to hurt you, but not like this. I felt tears prick at my eyes, my carefully constructed walls crumbling. I just wanted to be enough for you. I thought if I did everything right, if I was a good husband, you'd. I don't know. The guilt hit me like a wave, drowning me in regrets. I had wanted revenge, but I hadn't stopped to think about the cost, the toll it would take on both of us. Now, the opportunity for apologies, explanations, and closure had slipped away, leaving me with nothing but silence. In the days that followed, I became a ghost of myself, moving through life in a fog. The kids knew something was wrong, but I couldn't find the words to tell them the truth. All they knew was that their mom was in the hospital, and she might not be coming home. And every time they asked, I saw the confusion and sadness in their eyes, a reflection of my own. Lisa stayed in that coma for weeks, her condition stable but unchanged. I visited her every day, watching her lying there, helpless and vulnerable, a shadow of the woman I'd once loved. I didn't know if she'd ever wake up, but each day I sat by her side, hoping for a miracle and dreading what might come. In the end, the person who suffered the most wasn't her. It was me, trapped in a prison of my own making, haunted by the choices I'd made and the life we'd lost. The revenge I'd wanted so badly had come at a price I never expected, leaving me with nothing but emptiness and sorrow.